From New York City, I'm Steven Shalowitz, and this is the One Way Ticket Show. Now, I've seen many of your interviews, Tony. We'll tick off some of those that you've interviewed. Susan Rice, they all happen to be women that I'm mentioning, but of course you've interviewed your fair share of men. Susan Rice, Dolly Parton, J.Lo, Linda Ronstadt, Hillary Clinton, and on and on. Can you talk about your preparation, Tony, going into an interview and your method of interviewing? Because I'm asking not only for myself, but for others that are podcasters or others that do interviews that listen to my program, because there's something that I noticed is that you don't have notes in front of you, at least not for Dolly Parton, J.Lo, Linda Ronstadt.
No, I never have notes. I never have notes for a profile interview. And ultimately, I never have notes for any interview, not even the ones you see that are 4 minutes long and very quick on a live broadcast, because it's essential in every circumstance to have done enough prep work that you have developed a game plan, but that the game plan is flexible so that when you're in the conversation, it really is a conversation. It's a game of tennis. It's not wall ball. If you do one thing and then they do another, you've got to be able to react with them. And you're only going to get good stuff in an interview if you are alert to the signals that the person you're talking to is giving you about what they're ready to say or where they're ready to go. And you only know what's interesting if you've done the research you've done the research to know, they have a funny relationship with their father, and there's a reference here to fathers and sons. I think I'm actually gonna dwell on that for a second. And they seem like they're ready to talk about it. So let's just test a little bit. And you knock on the door, and hopefully you get something that is not, to your earlier point, it's not a gotcha. It's sort of an invitation. It's, hey, I'm listening sensitively to what you're saying, and I think you're talking about this. And then if the person feels comfortable with you because of the overall conversation, then they go there. This is something I learned from Anthony Mason. He's the very best, I think, in the business right now at that kind of interview, at a biographical interview where his antennae are way up for the emotional mood of the conversation. And when somebody is feeling sentimental or somebody is feeling reflective, he slows everything down and he just sits in that feeling, and he gets unbelievable stuff from incredibly famous people who have been interviewed all the time. And I aspire to that thing, to similar moments, and you can only get there if you don't have notes.
And interesting, you mentioned a moment ago the importance of improv, right? And studying improv, because that's what improv does, builds off one another, two people, correct?
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. So I went to college at George Washington University, and GW is a city campus, so it's a bar scene. It's not like a house party scene, the social life. And it wasn't until I got to GW, just of my life, that I ended up in the kind of crowded bar scene, not knowing who to talk to, what to do, and realizing that, in fact, I could go up to anybody and I could hold any conversation and go in any direction. And it was sort of a fun trick. And that was the beginning of my realization that, people aren't that scary, A, and B, a conversation is a conversation. Like, if you listen, it's always easy to find what's interesting. And the person you're talking to, you'll probably find it interesting too.
We had Dick Cavett on the program twice, and I remember him telling me, I can't remember if it was before we started rolling or during one of the interviews, but he said that Jack Parr told him it's all about a conversation. In other words, you don't go in necessarily with a whole litany of questions, but just make it a conversation. And that was his guiding principle. And I have to tell you, Tony, so during lockdown here, a lot of people have been going to Netflix and Amazon Prime, et cetera. I've been doing a lot of watching of old Johnny Carson and Dick Cavett.
Do the very same thing.
Have you watch
it on the Decades channel?
No, I just watch it on YouTube.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I watch old Johnny Carson in particular. But go on.
No, I was just going to say, and it's just so brilliant to watch them in action, because they were real masters of the craft of conversation, particularly Dick Cavett. I mean, I saw his interviews which I loved with Lucille Ball, with Betty Davis. And the things that he picks up on and his responses are just brilliant. And I think some of it is innate in who he is, but it's just the fact that he's able to pick up on those little triggers that they've put out there, like what you said Anthony Mason does, and he's so skilled at that. Which, Tony, brings me to Hillary Clinton, actually, because just out of curiosity, you asked her about President Clinton's relationship with Monica Lewinsky. It was part of a larger context of a conversation. You didn't just come out there and ask her that. Did you provide her with questions in advance? Do you provide your guests with the topics that you want to cover? And was there trepidation in going there with Hillary Clinton?
There's never anybody getting questions in advance. I think grown-ups know what is on the table to be talked about, and people have a kind of a headline to the conversation like, hey, Mr. Ben Stiller, you've got a new movie coming out. We'd love to talk about how you made that movie and also your career to this point and where you think it's going.
What you're saying is everything's fair game.
Well, when you're a big public figure, I think, yes, everything is fair game. And then with Hillary Clinton in particular, I'm trying to remember the context for that interview. I think we were talking about women in politics.
Yes.
And it was about a historic year for women running for office. And she had written a book in which there was a whole chapter about being a woman in politics. So that was the broader conversation, was the book, the moment in history. But because she's a major public figure and she had not commented on the way her husband's behavior with a woman was being evaluated in our heightened understanding of what's appropriate and what's not today versus 1999. She hadn't been questioned on that. Totally fair game. As a leader, she should be ready for that question. Now, as for asking it, you know when you ask that question, and in every interview there is 1 to 3 questions where you're like, whew, I know I have to ask this. I know the person doesn't want to talk about it, and I don't know how they're going to react. So you do it in the final 15 minutes. You get in all the things that you know you want to get to. You have the story, the interview is done. And if they walked out when you asked the one explosive question, it would be okay. And that would be fine. So you wait till the moment is ready. And one of the surprising things about Hillary Clinton in that interview is she did not appear particularly ready for the question. And I think she got herself in a little bit of headline trouble because her answer could have been more thought out and thoughtful than it was. As for, are you afraid to ask the question? It is always uncomfortable, regardless of the rapport, regardless of how seasoned you are in the business, to sit across from somebody with the cameras running and with all their people in the room and with all the people that are part of the CBS production in the room watching to ask the question. But you do it, and you try to do it, as to our earlier point about Gail, with as much humanity and kindness as possible, but at the same time, as much clarity and pointedness so that you elicit clear information. And so that's what I tried to do. But man, yeah, the look in her eyes as the question was unfolding, it does require one to clench and keep going.
I can imagine. And what was that moment like for you once the interview was over?
You know, it's such a curious thing because people's reactions are, so when you're dealing with famous people, whether it's a big Hollywood star or a major political figure, they've done a lot of performing in public. So how they are at the end of the interview is not necessarily reflective of how they felt about the interview.
Interesting.
So with Hillary, for example, we finished and we were in Chappaqua in a room that was part of a nice restaurant that was near where they live. And everyone was nice. We finished the interview. That was also fascinating. You know, I'm also interested in this subject. We didn't get to this. What do you think of that? You know, there's kind of the outro small talk. And then everyone leaves. And then there's kind of a big sigh. And you look over at your producer, and your producer looks at you, and you look at the crew, the camera guy, the audio guy, anyone else who's in the room. And then you start talking. like you and I are. What did you think? Really? What did you think? Really? What did you think? How about that? How about that answer on this? Um, and what's really fascinating is you'll get maybe 12 hours later, sometimes 24 hours later, is when you really know the reaction. Because then you start getting calls from the representatives, sometimes from the person themselves, but from the representative saying, we really feel X, Y, and Z. Like, we don't want this, or that it wasn't clear about this, and they start, in essence, working their point of view further in hopes that whatever they said is put favorably as they see it. And it's really interesting because sometimes things that you never thought were even uncomfortable, sometimes the question that I think is uncomfortable is not the one that you get a bunch of calls about. It's fascinating how what you think is going to be delicate is not always what is delicate for the other person. And it's a reminder that for all the research in the world, for all the attentive listening one does, you're still a human being sitting across from another human being. And there are some fundamental mysteries that will never be broached. We'll never truly know what's going on in that other person's head. We'll do our best to get close, but in the end, there is no certainty.